We're live on YouTube now.
Thanks very much. Well, welcome everyone to this evening's meeting of the Audit Committee. As you know, it's got a bit of uniqueness tonight in that it is the final committee, which probably explains why we've got such a packed agenda. We're used to having heavy agendas, but we've certainly got one tonight. I'll crack on at pace and start with item 1, which is apologies. I've received apologies from Councillors Golby and Botwood. Are there any further apologies?
No, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. I've also been asked to point out that the leader of the council and the portfolio holder for finance are viewing this meeting as we speak. Let's move on from the apologies to the minutes. I've read through the minutes, as I suspect quite a lot of you have. I don't think there's anything in the minutes that's not picked up on the main agenda this evening. So if that's okay with everyone, if I can perhaps ask my deputy to second the minutes and we can move them as being an accurate record.
Happy to second, Chair. Happy to second.
Thank you for that. Item 3, deputations and public addresses. I'm not aware of any. Item 4, are there any declarations of interest? No, I'm not hearing anything. I'm not aware on item 5 there are any matters of urgency. So if we can move on to item 6, and I suspect this might slip to item 7, but we'll start with item 6, which was an internal audit update from colleagues at BDO. So I assume that either Greg or Gurpreet will introduce this item for the committee.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So we have 2 papers. One is the follow-up of recommendations, which I'll take, and then that's followed, I think, by the opinion, which Greg will present on. So the follow-up, I'll just spend a little bit longer than usual just talking through this because, as I say, it's the final committee and it's probably a little bit more busier than previous follow-ups because we've tried to capture not only what we have followed up, but all of our recommendations so that there's almost a one-stop document so that whoever takes this forward into the unitary has all of our recommendations in one place. So you'll see on what is page 10 of your packs, I think, but the second page within this report is the summary table. So it looks back over the last 3 years. Happy to take any questions on, the different columns and what's outstanding, but the detail is behind. But maybe a few things just to pick up on. So from 2018-19, there are 3 that are overdue. However, in the report, we do note about those 3 that was discussed with the council. They're all related to delivering training, and because of COVID, it's challenging to deliver the training for those areas, and so it was agreed, or the council proposed that actually that would be picked up as part of in future months in the new unitary. So it was acknowledged as overdue, but actually it's probably not one that's feasible to do until COVID restrictions have passed. In 2019-20, again, you can see the table there. There is a low completion rate. So in the bottom right-hand corner of that table, there's 9 that are completed out of 22 that we were, 9% complete out of the 22 that we were looking at, which are the 2 that relate to asset management. There are some that are overdue relating to GDPR, contract management and cyber, and there are some around safeguarding and disabled facilities grant, which we didn't receive a response to for these papers, and so we don't have a current position on those ones. And then for the current year, 2020-2021, as a number of these reports were finalised later in the year, many of them we've said take forward to the new unitary. So that's in the final column. So there's 14 highs and 9 mediums to be taken forward. There are a few of these complete, so there's 12 of those that are complete. And those that are in progress, particularly around social lettings, in the report, it just outlines that actually a bit more time was needed on those. So I was just going to give the summary of those, probably the ones that may require focus, and I think, Chair, that you might look at is those around possibly safeguarding, where there was the non-responsive. I know that had a discussion here at the last committee, or anything about the process side of stuff, let me know. I wasn't intending to go through the detail of all of them because obviously we'll pick that up in questions, but it was just to outline how the follow-up works this time, and then it's got a little bit more detail than previously. So happy to take any questions.
Okay, can I just check, Capri, are you, in terms of walking through the papers, are you at page 8, as it were, at this point then? Are you going to continue on from there, or is this the final bit of this item that you've presented?
This is the final part of the follow-up. I'm looking at the agenda pack that's on the website, yeah. Which starts at page 9 for this paper, yeah, and finishes on page 30, which is a intentionally blank page, and then page 31 is the next report, which is the annual opinion that Greg will pick up. So that's
fine. So just let me be clear. You've presented your position up till the point of Greg coming along now, and you're just opening it up for questions.
Yeah, open up for questions on the follow-up. Yeah,
that's fine. Thank you for that. Yeah, let me put that open to people in the first place. Then I've got a few questions myself, but if I can open it up to the committee for any questions people have.
I don't know if I've got questions, Chair, but I've got a couple of observations, and they're around housing. So I'm a bit concerned that the Social Lettings Agency hasn't really got cracking, and I'm disturbed to hear that they've only got 3 landlords and we don't have an empty housing officer. And then the other cause for concern really is the statements made around NPH. NPH are doing a fantastic job, actually, in my view, but the relationship between the borough and NPH doesn't seem to be as good and as transparent, as open as it should be. And I just think that both those things are giving me cause for concern as we go into the new authority.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Stone. Can I just hold on to those questions for a second, because they do overlap some of the things that I was going to say anyway, so we can perhaps help in terms of time. Are there any other questions from the committee?
Chair, may I just briefly interject? Sorry, Phil Harris, who's the Director of Housing and Wellbeing, is struggling to get into the meeting, and clearly he is best placed to deal with any specific housing questions. So I've just asked Democratic Services to resend the details to him, which they've just done.
Okay.
So I think if we can keep hold of these housing questions until Phil enters the meeting, with your permission, Chair, so that we can have a full and rounded debate in terms, quite rightly, in terms of the questions that are being raised, with your permission.
Okay, that makes sense. Just to pick that up with Councillor Stone. So what I'm going to suggest is that we perhaps move on to the next paper, which I think is a more general view, obviously fed by this paper, and subject to, is it Phil, sorry, did you say coming into the meeting? We'll perhaps pop back onto this original paper. So perhaps, can we move to item 7 and ask Greg to provide the background to the statement on BDO's assurance judgment.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. So you'll have our Head of Internal Audit opinion in front of you. We've given limited assurance overall on your risk governance and controls, which is obviously disappointing in this last year. But I think you can see it's backed up by the conclusions of the individual reports. We have 2 reports giving moderate design on controls and limited on effectiveness. We have 1 report which is limited on design, moderate on effectiveness, 3 reports which are limited on both the design and the effectiveness of the controls, and 1 more positive one on licensing, which is substantial on design and moderate on effectiveness. I would say, before I go into talking about some of those issues, to say we were asked by officers to focus on the levels of highest risk and known issues, and I think that is a positive in terms of the sort of openness and transparency of the authority, asking us to focus on those areas. I'd also say some of the issues in the reports go back some way. On the capital projects, for example, we're talking about the Abbey project, which is quite old. The issues around MPH, the housing provider, we've given those views in terms of the council's management of the provider, and really the main issues go back to a kind of lack of understanding between the two parties as to what the provider should be assessed against. So the council believes it should be the management agreement, but MPH believes there was a deed of variation signed, which gives them a different reporting structure, and it appears that deed of variation was drafted but never signed, and there was therefore confusion. So unfortunately that has resulted in some of the issues around both our audit of MPH and also of the health and safety arrangements as well, which I think there's some confusion around those. So those are really the issues that need to be addressed and will be addressed by the unitary authority. There's already some discussions going ahead with MPH to agree a way forward and exactly what the reporting mechanism should be. And I think it's a sort of general theme on some of these areas. I think there is a theme around contract management, key performance indicators, project management. So areas that will be addressed and will need to be addressed by the new authority. I think this year, in the lead up to unitary status, there have been some issues in getting sort of prompt responses to audit reports and getting some of the recommendations implemented. Perhaps that's inevitable, in this environment as you're moving towards unitary. Plus, we've had COVID on top, obviously, which has also caused some issues. I would say, at a very senior level, in terms of the sort of chief executive, finance director level, we've had very good engagement and support, and that has been very helpful. But as I say, I think we have struggled at some other levels within the organisation. Not the most positive report, but hopefully at least gives you a sort of very honest assessment of areas to be addressed as you move into unitary status, and obviously happy to take any comments or questions.
Okay, thank you, Greg. If I can just come in on this to begin with, it seems to me as if, despite my best efforts to keep the two issues separate, the NPH issue will come back. So we'll have a discussion on that when we pop back into the previous paper. The one thing I particularly wanted to ask you about on this was, yes, it is disappointing that we showed improvement over sort of previous years, and things have got knocked back on this. But notwithstanding that, the issues are around, and they will need to be managed going forward. And I just wondered if you could say a bit more about your discussions with the new organisation, because clearly it's important here that we don't get a sort of see ourselves on a separate island. The people of Northampton are going to be part of the new organisation as well, and I think it's important that that transfer has been robust. So I'd be interested in your professional view as terms of what the sort of discussions you've been party to have demonstrated.
We've had no direct discussions with the new unitary authority. We've had discussions with LGSS as the new internal audit provider, and obviously they will be given a sort of full list of recommendations to ensure that they've been implemented. And it's possible that there may be some involvement by BDO in supporting them in that, but that hasn't been finalised yet. I do know, as I said, on the MPH side, I do know that there's been discussions with the unitary, and they are agreeing a way forward, but I'm not able to comment on the other areas. I don't know if any of the officers would be able to do that. Okay.
Thanks for that. Just before we get into bringing officers in on that, are there any other questions from the committee in terms of this particular paper before we go back to the previous one? Councillor Stone?
Just wanted to ask if the findings, if through the course of their investigations, they could make an assessment of how far COVID has impacted on what's been going on, because I'm very aware that the staff have had to bring in locums and, we've lost staff because of the reorganisation. There's been COVID, there's been all kinds of issues which have put the staff under the most tremendous amount of pressure. And I just wonder how much that has impacted on the findings and whether there's anything comparable happening in other local authorities, so that we can be assured, you know, that some of the context within which our staff are working hasn't been under their control.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a very genuine, fair point. It's been a difficult period, but let me not answer that. I think if I can ask Greg or Gurpreet to perhaps give their take on that particular issue.
Do you want me to start that, Greg, or do you want to take it?
Do.
Yeah. I guess in terms of the findings, the way I see it, I think with as Greg outlined, with the implementation of findings, I think clearly COVID has had an impact because it's difficult for officers to find the time. There's other pressures that they're dealing with, and so to actually act upon the findings, and that's why we do have things that go back to 2018-19, as I mentioned. You know, delivering training means that implementing those has been challenging, and then there's a number from 1920 as well. In terms of the findings themselves, obviously, as Greg outlined, there are some themes across some of these reports. Obviously, with MPH, you talked about the agreement between the borough and with MPH. Actually, that predates COVID, and so that finding would, you know, possibly still be there. Whether that would have been acted upon earlier if COVID and moving to unitary wasn't happening, you know, is anybody's guess. But the actual root of the finding, if you like, predates COVID. Some of the things around contract management, again, that predates COVID in terms of procurement documentation and information that should be in place. That this is all kind of before that, so those findings are kind of valid before this, before COVID has come in. And so that theme, and even social lettings, obviously the agreement for the social lettings agency, the actual business plan, a long time predates COVID. And some of our concerns and findings are about that initial agreement and, you know, having greater details on KPIs. So I would definitely say with the implementation, it's clearly had an impact. With the findings, whether they would have been acted upon earlier or been dealt with if there was more headroom to deal with that, possibly. But actually, I think the findings, there is a clear theme that a number of these do go back beyond the current year, and so therefore on that basis then COVID wouldn't necessarily be the explanation for that. On the comparable bit to councils, I think maybe it's worth bringing Greg in on that question about how others are faring.
Yeah, it's particularly affected implementation of recommendations. We've seen that at our other local authority clients. But if I'm being honest, in terms of sort of overall controls and reports in the year, we're not seeing that deterioration in the opinions we've been giving at those other councils. Occasionally there is an area, but not as a theme. It's been more around implementation of recommendations.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? I'm very conscious of the fact that I can't see too many people's faces. So if anyone has got a question, please do shout up as I ask that. So I'm not hearing anyone at this point. So I'm going to suggest we go back to the previous item, I think item 6. And George, I assume we're being joined by the housing lead as well. Is that? Am I correct on that? Can I go back? I suppose is what I'm asking.
Yes, Chair, you are correct. Phil Harris is Director of Housing and Wellbeing. Is now with us. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for that. So, yeah, if I can sort of kick off and hopefully combine the question that Councillor Stone asked, really, it's really as I go through the report, particularly around page 12, 13, and there are a lot of high-level or high-risk recommendations in there in relation to MPH, and it sort of demonstrates a theme. And Greg has already mentioned this point about the lack of understanding in terms of the relationship between the two organisations in terms of performance management. And I just wondered if we can start just by getting a management view on what audit have found and how that's been taken forward.
You're on mute, Phil.
Thank you. Okay. Apologies, Chair, for being late. Had some technical problems. Yes, I mean, we meet with NPH on a regular basis, and as has been highlighted in the audit, the full audit, there's some examples of good practice in terms of the liaison, in terms of the housing delivery group, which looks at new developments of council housing, and we hold regular quarterly meetings looking at various elements of performance. And I do that as Director of Housing with the Cabinet Member for Housing. I think what the audit highlighted, that there were different interpretations or things that could have been done differently if they'd been operated differently by the council. If there had been more clearer, more defined roles for different senior officers within the council, and obviously areas for improved communication, so that there was a protocol for the way in which NPH engaged with the council through officers. And I know that that's something we've talked through with West Northamptonshire Council. There are differences of opinion over how we got there to the situation we've got, and I think Greg has described earlier how some of those elements relate to a deed of variation where the council hasn't seen assigned or doesn't believe there was a deed of variation, and NPH has said actually there was. And I think that the various changes of personnel, particularly the chief execs over the years, have clearly not helped that situation. So on a daily basis, the relationship with Northampton Partnership Homes is very good on the front line. And I think it's when you've got an arm's length management organisation that wants to be arm's length, wants to be as independent as possible, and the council doesn't want to fetter that enthusiasm and energy and innovation, but does need to hold it to account, or the council is accountable for that organisation. So I think that's where there've been differences of opinion, and that's been highlighted by the internal audit. What I would reassure you, though, Chair, and the committee, is that I've met with West Northampton's senior level for a couple of hours as the first meeting to talk through the issues that have been highlighted, to give advice on what could be done differently. And they have obviously held meetings with NPH, drawing on the lessons learned from this, providing the clarity that is needed to move on.
Okay, thank you. I'll open this out in a second, but if I could ask, in terms of the excuse me, the deed of variation, is that something that has been resolved then as part of the discussions with West Northants? Because the bit just before you answer that, the bit that I find slightly odd is that it's taken an internal audit report, it appears, to have raised this issue of a deed of variation. And I question in my own mind what value this deed has had if, as you've been saying, that the relationships have been fine for some considerable time. So I'm just a bit confused.
Okay. Well, the deed of variation relates to whether the board meetings are in public or not in public, and the access that the council officers have to the information the board receives, and those are the differences of opinion. So those meetings are held in private, and the council's representation on that board is with members only. So and that's persisted, that's continued.
So going forward, what will be the position in terms of access to information?
So I think having, I mean, my understanding is that from discussions with officers at West Northamptonshire Council is that they will want an officer to attend all board meetings and receive all board papers, and they will make a decision on whether or not those meetings or parts of them are held in public. So we're really starting again. It is the opportunity for the new council to make those decisions, leaving aside what's happened in the past. And I think that will be, the discussions we've had with West Northampton has been very positive in that sense. And they seem quite clear about what they're looking for with that new relationship.
Okay, thank you for that. If I can open it up to the rest of the committee for any questions there. No, I'm not hearing anything on that. Can I then move us on to...
Sorry, Chair. I've come in.
Right, Brian?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what Councillor Stone said about MPH. I mean, to me, MPH have done absolutely sterling work. They've been brilliant, and they've been brilliant on all sorts of aspects of what they've been doing. I mean, Phil's just mentioned about the terms of transparency of board meetings includes clear requirements from MPH in terms of transparency of board meetings and annual preparations of the delivery plan, what Greg was referring to. But they're all, as Phil's just said, there are board members, which are members, council members on there, and the transparency. I can't believe that there can't be any transparency coming from MPH. I mean, I've got nothing but high praise for MPH and the work that they've done, and I can't believe that there's anything that they're lacking. I know there's this agreement, but Greg referred to something not being signed when he was giving his summary that wasn't signed. And well, why? Who are they saying didn't sign this agreement or whatever it is, this deviation or what they're talking about? I mean,
Chair Francis Fernandez, if I can assist on that point when you're ready.
Yep, that's
Through
fine.
you, Chair.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Chair, the legal position is that there is a management agreement in place that was signed by the parties. The management agreement requires the board meetings to be in public. That's what the management agreement says. So legally, NPH would need to hold its board meetings in public or risk breaching the management agreement. And basically what happened was there were some discussions about whether that position should change and that the deed of variation should change that clause about public meetings to private meetings. And it's that deed of variation that was not agreed, yeah? But it would appear that MPH have continued having their meetings in private on the there's a miss of that clause was changed or not, a misunderstanding from NPH's point of view. So that deed of variation from our perspective was not signed. So the legal position remains that those meetings should be in public. And so I think that's what that is. It's just the deed of variation to change public to private. That's all that deed of variation is looking to do. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Francis. So I suppose it begs the question for me in terms of moving forward. Has the new authority agreed a position then with NPH in terms of it going public? Because it seems a very simple, straightforward issue in terms of process. I'm surprised we've got ourselves in the position we have, to be honest.
I probably prefer George to answer that. George will have had some discussions that I haven't had with West Northampton.
Yeah, thanks, Phil, and thank you through you, Chair. So the conversations that I've had with Stuart Lackenby and also, to be fair, the CEO of Northampton Partnership Homes as well is the report is helpful in terms of undertaking a review of the current management agreement, which is what we've been referring to. and obviously the transition to the new unitary authority provides an ideal time to both using this report and the transition to the new West Northants for a review of that management agreement. So I'm led to believe from the conversations that I've had with senior officers at West Northants Shadow Authority, West Northants Council, that will be undertaken, and some of the suggested improvements Phil was referring to earlier, but clearly that will be determined by West Northants Council through its own governance processes at their future meetings, Chair.
Okay. Yep, thank you for that, George. That's, I suppose, a positive note to end on there. So that is helpful. Just continuing on the report for a second. The other issue I wanted to raise was really around page 21 and the lack of responsiveness to the recommendations there, predominantly around the safeguarding report. To put it bluntly, I think this does reflect poorly on the council, and I'd like, I don't know if it's you, George, or someone else on the management side, to explain why the auditors have found it so difficult to get a response to this review in an area that is sensitive, to say the least.
Well, that's I'm quite happy to answer that, George. So it was me that was being chased, and I apologise for that failure. Councillor Stone referred earlier on, and this isn't an excuse. Councillor Stone referred earlier on to the extra pressures on implementing, for officers implementing recommendations dealing with these really serious issues on top of other issues. And one of the positives that's come out of COVID is the way in which Northampton Borough Council's responded to everyone in and rough sleeping. And we've probably done as much as any council in the country to deal with rough sleeping, but that isn't without cost. We picked that up on the 27th of March in 2020. And I can say seriously, I oversaw that as a director, taking that on because of the pressure, the urgency, the priority, the vulnerability of individuals. And even though I've had all my leave during the last financial year, I've probably taken 3 proper days of it. And I've been trying to balance the work that I've been doing. And in that case, we dealt with the most important bits of safeguarding to keep people safe. But I personally failed in terms of responding to the requests for updates. And that is when you're working 6.5 days a week. So I was very reluctant to refer to that, what I've just described, but that is the reality. I finish on the 1st of April, and I'm pleased because that will come as a relief. And I have been working solidly in recent months to implement all the changes that we're doing. So, you know, I take full responsibility. No one else is responsible but me. George isn't, nobody else is. But I assure you, we have done a lot on safeguarding. I have personally not done what I should have done in terms of responding. And I know that you personally, Chair, have commented on that at previous meetings. So I do apologise. Okay, that's helpful to hear, Phil. Obviously, our job as the committee is to ask the questions, which you know, sometimes is uncomfortable for people, and I do, as well as I'm sure the council do, appreciate the work that, you know, yourself and your staff have put in over what's been a difficult period. So I absolutely acknowledge that. In terms of moving forward, and I know you're about to leave the organisation anyway, I suppose the issue for me is, you said that that a lot of these things have, you know, you've been working on, and it's sort of not reflected
in this page that I'm looking at. But I suppose what I want is some reassurance that the baton's been handed on and there is going to be a push towards resolving these issues.
Absolutely, Chair. So we've got a meeting. I've got a meeting with the Assistant Director for Housing Communities in West Northants next week. One of a number of handovers that we've got. We have had a discussion. I didn't, unfortunately, return the tracker on this. So therefore, in the update report, it reflects a no response. I have talked to one of the auditors, Max, this afternoon and shared with him an update on where we're going and what we've done. We have closed off quite a lot of the recommendations in there. There is still more to be done, and that will be finished. We are piloting a system of assessing training needs within housing wellbeing. So we will be having a discussion about these audit findings with West Northants. Because it is a unitary, many of the policies that have been recommended for development in this audit, including the youth safety policy and safeguarding, that's already in place and will be in place from day one for the unitary. So you have my assurance that on this and other issues, I'm working around the clock to close them down and to hand everything over in order that there is continuity. And it's a matter of professional pride about finishing off things like this where I've fallen short during the year.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for your full explanation of that. It just on that theme, it does put a question in my mind in terms of this follow through. Colleagues at BDO, I'm assuming that you won't be continuing on this work post 31st of March. Is that right?
Well, it's possible, but we haven't finalised arrangements yet. So it's, right. I mean, LGSS will be taking over formally as the internal auditors to the new unitary right. organisations. But they've been in discussions with us about possibly supporting them right. At West Northants. So if that happened, then obviously we may get involved in seeing some of these things through. But even if it doesn't happen, we'll certainly provide a full list of outstanding recommendations to them, and very happy to provide supporting information and anything else they need.
Yeah, that's helpful. I've probably aimed the question at the wrong person, to be honest, Greg. I suppose what I should have said is to either George or Stuart that I think it would be really helpful if we could use a bit of BDO time, you know, in the next couple of months to just see how progress has gone on these and close them down. I would hate to think that we lose the audit connection as well as the organisational connection as we move forward. So I don't know if that can be arranged, George or Stuart.
I'll take that one, Chair, if I may. So I'm obviously doing the handovers to my successor, the Section 151, along with 9 ADs, and to give the committee assurance, the governance and risk manager is migrating across to the west and will work for the successor 151, Martin Henry, and with her she will take all of the BDO reports. That is a commitment I've made to West and to George. So all our BDO reports in their completeness will be handed over as a set. We're not able, much as we would like, to be honest, to commission BDO a little longer. It's outside our contractual powers. We can only run them up to the 31st of March. We have advocated their value, and although some of the reports are difficult to read, we do believe, you know, with George's support that we did want to test some areas because we wanted continuous improvement. We know some of the things are historic, but BDO have helped us on a pathway. The paperwork doesn't necessarily look as good as what we actually have achieved, but yes, we advocate the benefit of BDO to the west.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. I just think it would be remiss of us not to follow through on these issues. Yeah, that's particularly helpful.
And if I may I just say a few words just
of course.
to you? So as colleagues have said, so first of all, the areas that we've chosen over during my tenure is definitely been to look at those areas that need rigor and an internal review, and so that's why over the last 3 years we have shone BDO's spotlight into those areas. And as with anything, sometimes what you find is not, whilst it may not be comfortable in reading, it's about learning and improving and putting the necessary measures in place going forward. Certainly for this last financial year, and as Stuart has already said, there were some areas that were historical, but again, it was about looking at the learning from those so that we can hand that on to the new unitary authority, West Northamptonshire Council. So this is about is much about looking forward and creating the right internal controls for West Northamptonshire, learning from some of the areas that we've undertaken in the last 3 years. So I just wanted to say, just say those few words. And as I say, whilst the reports may not be as a level that we would all necessarily like, it does ensure that the learning and some of those gaps can be addressed going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Georgia. I funnily enough, I was going to say something slightly similar to that, really. I think, first of all, I would like to thank BDO for the work they've done, because it always comes across as thorough, as professional, and so on. That's been good. And as you've just said, George, the positive aspect of that is it does get to the nub of issues. And certainly with, if you like, a pure audit chair's hat, it's absolutely what I would want to see. So yes, I agree with you that the scorecard may not be look great on the surface, but to have avoided some of the issues anyway would have been absolutely the wrong thing to do. So I think if we can move on with some of the issues that we've been talking about earlier, then hopefully the new authority can maybe see the benefits of that in future. It's a pity it won't have the Northampton Borough Council badge on it, but yeah, I do agree with much of what you've said there. It would have been easier to have not taken that route. So thank you for that, and again, thank you to BDO. So if that's okay, if we can move on to...
Can I just ask a question, Chair?
Sorry, of course.
I'm glad George and you have both, said what you've said about the internal auditors, because I found their work enormously valuable. But now I'm really, really confused about the status of LGSS. I don't understand it. I thought LGSS had disappeared. I thought we'd repatriated everybody back into one or other authority. So what is the status of LGSS? And are they going to be the internal auditors for the West and for the North, or just for the West? Can somebody explain that to me?
Yeah, I as chair, I certainly can't, but I'm sure George or Stuart could probably steer us in the right direction there.
George is looking at me, so I'll take it. We still refer to LGSS in the terms of who they were. There is no LGSS in that sense, apart from LGSS law, which continues. So whilst we still refer to our colleagues, and the report tonight still says LGSS internal audit, there is no LGSS internal audit. There is an internal audit function that, under the NCC demise of LGSS, was agreed to be delivered as a lead authority model, and that lead authority model is hosted by Milton Keynes. my understanding at the moment is that they are probably going to deliver the internal audit function for West and North, but that will be for West and North to reaffirm. From our perspective, we're keen for the governance and risk manager to move to the West, and I've been an advocate of the professionalism from BDO, and I think both of those authorities need to agree their way forward, and I suspect that will be part of the shadow audit committees and future audit committees to decide. Does that help?
Yeah, I see a nod from Councillor Stone, so thank you. And apologies, I did rush on that last time. Are there any other questions before we move on to item 8?
Just a short one, Chair, just again to express the thanks the other way around, and to yourself and to Chief Executive and George, but particularly to Stuart, to Joe and to Karen, who have been immensely helpful in supporting the service over the last few years. So just to put on note, BDO's thanks to all those individuals in helping us. Okay,
thank you for that. Great. Item 8, which is LGS's internal audit plan. Stuart, do you want to say anything on this, or have we got someone that's leading?
We have a lead. She's just trying to find unmute. Welcome to Jahinta. This is or despite the title, this is really a sort of short update from what we still refer to as LGSS internal audit.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. I think as Stuart says, we are not being called LGSS at the moment anymore, because obviously LGSS did finish in December. We haven't arrived at a proper name. I think we refer to ourselves as Internal Audit Shared Service delivered by Milton Keynes, and it's quite a mouthful. So I think people tend just to be using the LGSS monitor at the moment. Obviously, we audit a sample of support type services areas that we review. And in December, I think committee had requested that I produce a stock take, if you like, of audits that were outstanding as at March. And the short report which I've got here does list sort of the audits and the status. And I've tried to give a position statement in sort of the key points at the bottom, where everything is and what progress was being made. I think in reality, though, we're obviously looking and looking for staff, support staff, who in reality have other priorities at the moment. So that there has been difficulty in getting engagement. A lot of the staff are obviously involved in year-end activities. They're involved in a lot of the preparation work for going to the new unitaries. So the general ledger audit, for example, and the treasury management audits involves a lot of the finance staff. And they have been really busy at the moment trying to do financial statements, and obviously also involved in a lot of the transfers to the unitary. So whilst there's been progress, it has been slow, but we are aiming to try and complete all of these audits, because we understand a lot of the teams who are transferring potentially are the same people. So we hope that we'll be able to do some continuity on that within the first month of the new authority. And what we're proposing is any recommendations that are raised from these works. The Chief Internal Auditor is compiling a list of recs from across all of the sort of the borough councils, the county councils, and he's going to take that to the 151s for them to consider how they want to progress that. So we will aim to complete these audits where we can. Obviously, for the rates and the accounts payable one, the accounts payable, there's continuity there because it's been delivered by Cambridge under a lead model arrangements. So we hope we'll be able to finish that audit. And similarly with the business rates, it's our understanding that the sovereign councils, for at least the first couple of months, if not the first year, will be progressing, will be doing the revenues and benefits service, and then there's an interface into the new authorities. So we feel we can continue with those audits. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, Chair. I wasn't going to say much more than that.
Okay, thank you. I open it up for questions. Any questions Anyone on the committee?
Just an observation, Chair. I don't feel very secure with those arrangements, I have to say. You know, I think in these very difficult times, there should have been continuity. And I'm not happy with this lead authority model. I'm not happy about it. I think there's too much scope for a lack of grip.
Thank you. Any comment, Jacinta, on that?
I'd rather not comment on that because I think, as Stuart kind of says, a lot of the arrangements are out of our hands as operational officers. Decisions are being made and we have to just kind of follow through. And I'm not sure I have enough information to be able to respond to how the lead authority model will pan out. There is continuity because it's the same team in that respect. So while arrangement.
Chair, just to add, Duncan Wilkinson's recently joined the meeting. He's the lead for that audit function. Perhaps he might wish to.
He might be able to, yeah. Thank you, Stuart.
Okay,
I wasn't aware Duncan had signed on.
Duncan, anything to add? No, is he with us?
Hello, yes. Sorry, I've had all sorts of technical difficulties this evening. Can people see and hear me?
Yeah.
Fabulous. I think the question was around continuity and how the lead authority model will work. Jacinta's absolutely right. There is some element of us providing the service and delivering with those decisions already taken. The full structure of the lead authority model is still subject to staff consultation in dealing with it. The new authority 151s paused the consideration of the lead authority model services, not just for audit, but for all of the shared service lead authority models, so that they could ensure that those proposals were within the budgetary envelopes. We are trying within that process to provide continuity and working closely with Joe Bonham as we try and do that and provide that continuity. There are conversations I'm still having, indeed, with BDO around ensuring we retain that organisational audit memory within what we are delivering. And we've also submitted to the two 151 officers of the unitary councils a proposal for day one operation as to how that would work whilst we're still formally consulting on service delivery, and a schedule of the Q1 tasks for audit that meet the assurance requirements for the new authorities. Inclusive within that Q1 schedule are the gathering and collation in April of the inherited issues. So things like audit recommendations, action trackers, the outstanding annual opinions coming from each of the boroughs and districts, and indeed the county council, so that we can collate those and present all of those as a consolidated process into the first meeting of the unitary council's audit committees, so that we don't lose track of any of those issues that are live within the boroughs and districts, and we provide that seamless consideration and memory as we deliver against all those issues, but also that enables us to face some of the unknown unknowns that we will face in the first 12, 24 months of the new councils. So there's a lot of work in the background to ensure that continuity of audit delivery through a difficult period of change. Undoubtedly, it will bring its challenges for us as to what we can't foresee and what we will face in the early days of that authority. But a lot of work to not lose the memory from each of the councils, and indeed the action trackers, the recommendations, the audit reports, all those things are being gathered together so that we can not lose any of those issues moving forward with the new councils. Pause at that point, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Again, apologies for being late to the meeting, but technology prevented me.
Okay. Yeah, can I just be clear? Of the core systems that you look at for Northampton at the moment, we've got some of those listed in the report, the treasury management, general ledger and all that sort of stuff. Will you, just so that I'm 100% clear, will you be taking on responsibility for the audit management of those as part of West Northants?
Yes.
You will.
Is a simple answer, yes.
Right.
The audit of them, not the management of them, but the audit of them. Yes.
Audit of them, right. Because the thing that concerns me is even when I look at the Northampton position, before I get on beyond the Northampton position, I see a report that's sort of suggesting that it's been very difficult to do the audit work.
Yes. And
that does concern me because I know there's been COVID and access to people and all the rest of it. But the switch to West Northants is presumably, at least in the short term, going to make this more challenging. I worry about the capability here of the audit function bit, because it's all very well talking about the BDO work, but BDO haven't, their remit hasn't been to look at some of the core financial systems. So I think Councillor Stone's comment about sort of uncertainty, I don't think that was quite the word you used, but I think it was something similar. I actually share. I read this report, and when I read, for instance, the comments on business rates, where you were struggling to get into doing that work. I know people have been under pressure to do business rates, but then there's a comment in there. It says an approach has been agreed with the head of service for the service to produce an assurance statement for review by internal audit. I have to say, I expect audit to go in and form their own opinion. I find that baffling.
I mean, the other question I was going to ask was, capability is one thing. What about capacity? There must be capacity issues.
It could be either, couldn't it?
Or both.
But I'm just concerned when I read this report. It does, certainly if I was the Section 151 officer on the other side, I'd be somewhat concerned about this. And I don't know, Duncan, I don't know what your response is to the sort of questions we've asked. You've explained the difficulties, but you're auditing significant sums of public money here, and I do have some concerns there.
Chair, I can't give you cover-all guarantees in the current environment. The approach we've taken around business rates is one that in an ideal world we would not be applying. Exactly right, we would be auditing, we would be forming the opinion, and we still reserve that right to do that. I think asking the head of service for an assurance statement, we tend to do that once a year anyway to feed into the annual governance statement. So what is the view of the key leads for each service around their governance processes? With the pandemic, it has been an unavoidable issue that our capacity has been there to perform the audits. It's the frontline capacity that we've had to accept, and I think quite rightly accept, and has been evident not just for the Borough Council or indeed the County Council, but across not just those other councils that my team audits, but also when I'm plugged into the audit networks. It is evident across the piece that frontline services are under significant pressure, and we have to give some due regard to how we audit. The phrase that we tend to use is a light touch in how we audit. We have often been impressed with how honest heads of service have been with us, rather than just signing off and saying, oh, everything is working wonderfully, that we get quite an honest assessment of the adequacy of their controls. And indeed, we specifically ask them about what controls are operating as normal and what controls have been, for example, lessened or switched off. And we tend to get very honest answers around that allow us to focus our audit attention in what we then audit. We certainly don't take the head of service assurance at face value, but it does provide us a means to target our audit resources. So I think in answer to the capacity issue, we will face pressures and challenges with the new model. One of the conversations I have with the 151 officer is if I slot all existing people into the proposed structure, we still have some vacancies there that we need to crack on and recruit to. And the mixed model that we are applying is to then be able to utilize not just BDO, but another partner we have to backfill those vacancies to bring us up to full capacity and indeed deal with any additional peaks of requests that we get through the 151s. I don't think capacity represents a great problem for us as an audit team. I think capacity to support us auditing a service from within each of the services is a challenge in the current environment. Those COVID pressures have not lessened, particularly around business rates and revs and bends. They are a particular hotspot for us, given the kind of government funding that is coming through that they are administering, and indeed that needs an audit view on those. And we work very closely with those services to ensure that we can align our work to deliver the appropriate assurances. But the last 12 months has meant we've had to take due regard for that. And indeed, CITFA have given some very useful advice around how we word our annual audit opinions for the current financial year to March the 31st, in being very clear that we must embrace the fact that we may not have audited everything we need to audit this year, and in recognizing that, guiding us as professional auditors to be very clear about our annual audit opinion, what it does cover, and what maybe we have not been able to audit in sufficient depth this year, with an intention to address that gap next year. So the professional guidance is recognizing our audit opinions may well be caveated this year across the national picture, because CITFA don't issue that guidance unless it is a common theme appearing nationally as a challenge to us. I hope that answers as fully as I can.
Yeah, that's helpful, Duncan. We heard similar comments earlier on a debate we were having. Clearly, this debate will get reflected in the minutes, and perhaps we can. I'm looking at Stuart, ensure that the comments go forward into West Northants, and they can at least see the anxiety, if that's the right term.
Could I just add, Chair? I very much welcome that going forward.
I was just about to say, and it's not aimed at that comment is not aimed at undermining you. It's aimed to help, because that you can't resolve this on your own. That's clearly the case. So thank you for that. That's helpful. Any other comments on that report? Under item 8, is that yes? I can see a hand. Councillor Eve, is it Eves?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'm sorry, I tried to put my little blue hand up. I didn't know what you could see and what you couldn't. There was a couple of words that really made me on edge there. Light touch audit and not being able to get everything done. We've just seen the cost involved when we've had to get external auditors for the missing £10 million. That the crazy costs that went on the back of that. So not doing our internal audits, not getting things done, or a light touch audit, massively on edge with that, really, really on edge with that. And again, not getting things done. We've got this issue that's happened with the Borough Council. You've got the issues that have gone along with the County Council. and we're merging a new council, surely we should be really heavily auditing everything that's going on and making sure all departments are covered in every possible way, because there's so many changes. You know, we've got so many new staff that are going to be coming in. We've got people being merged from all the different councils. This isn't a time for a light touch audit. This isn't a time to say, we're not really sure if we're going to be able to get it all done. No offense to the team that are doing it, because I'm sure they're working really, really hard. We need more guarantees than this. This is taxpayers' monies that of a town and an area that have been massively let down by the various councils. It's not a time to say, you know, let's just wait and see what happens. It's not the time.
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor Eve.
I just say I totally and absolutely agree with Councillor Eales. Absolutely agree.
Yeah, and thank you, Councillor Stone. You've just taken the words out of my mouth. It's pleased to say, I'm pleased to say, as the independent chair, I've obviously had a tiny bit of impact, because support to auditors is obviously a common theme on the rest of the committee, which I'm pleased about. But yes, the light touch, in all seriousness, is not something that we particularly want to support. And if if we can get these comments across to West Northampton, perhaps that will have some impact and help audit colleagues to put the level of resource in that is needed. And if we go back to the previous comment where the chief exec came in and made comments about the value of BDO's work, we're actually playing the same tune here. So let's try and make sure it's as strong as it needs to be. So. Okay, thank you for your comments on that. More audit to come now. We're on item 9, this time external audit. So welcome, Janet, our new external audit. Here's your chance to present your paper.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I'm joined by my colleague Mark Rutter as well. I don't think you've met either of us. Unfortunately, Steve Clark isn't very well at the moment, and so Mark and I have stepped in to take the audit forward. I'm pleased to say that, having read the minutes of the last audit committee meeting where Steve was giving you some very significant warnings around what timing, how we would manage the timing to get to the conclusion of the audit, I feel that Mark and I may have exceeded the expectations that he was managing, because we are now in a position to present to you the findings of our audit, which is pretty close to being complete. And we can talk about timing once I've taken you through the findings of this. So what I propose to do is take you to page 58 of your pack, and I'll just concentrate on the executive summary points, and then we can pause. Mark can give you an update as to what's still outstanding from the appendix that we had set at the time of writing to get this paper into the papers, and then we can take questions. So you'll note that obviously our work is done to a level of materiality. We're looking to ensure that the accounts are materially appropriately stated, so there's a true and fair position in there. And so we've been working to a threshold of just 1.9 million, and we use that to set our testing thresholds and all of the work that we're doing to make sure that we're comfortable that there aren't material misstatements in the accounts. Now, we've identified a number of audit differences, the majority of which have been adjusted for by management. And so there's another paper on the set of papers which shows you those movements in summary. There are 3 unadjusted audit differences that in aggregate come to 1.1 million. We agree with management that those are not material to the statements of accounts, but you will see them listed in the management representation letter that we ask for you to provide to us, to say that you're comfortable that those are not adjusted for in the final set of accounts that are approved. So in terms of the areas that we have worked through, they're set out in the detail from section 2 in terms of the areas of audit risk. and you'll see that those are pretty extensive for a borough council. We have some control observations coming out of the work as well. Those are, we haven't gone into a lot of detail around those because we expect that those will be handed on to the successor body to consider in terms of taking the systems and controls forward. But we do, what I would like to say at this point is we do anticipate providing an unqualified audit opinion on your financial statements. The other responsibility that we have is to look at the arrangements that were in place within the Borough Council during the financial year 18-19 to achieve value for money. Now, we've looked back, therefore, to understand what the key issues and risks were that the organisation was facing at that point, what was brought forward from the predecessor auditors as well, and then look at what the progress was. And that was focused predominantly around the governance action plan, the issues coming out of the football club loan and the financial resilience of the organisation. We've also had to pay attention to KPMG's report in the public interest, which came out in January, and consider back through our audit and our conclusions, whether or not there are any other areas of work that we needed to address. Within our value for money conclusion, therefore, we have considered those main areas of risk, and we are preparing to provide an adverse conclusion that the council did not have adequate arrangements in place across the board to achieve value for money, and that's explained in more detail in the report as well. So I think I'll pause there, pass over to Mark just to give you a headline as to the key areas that are outstanding before we would be able to say, yes, please sign the accounts and we'll provide our opinion. And then we'll take questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. So we set out in Appendix D to our report the areas which were outstanding at the time we provided this report. This has been a fast-moving area, and the close down team and management have been working very hard with us to try and close a number of these off. So we can remove a number of these, particularly around the redevelopment of the Vulcan works, restatement of 17-18 comparatives, financial instruments. I think we're just working through a couple of final queries. Generally, we're down to, we have an updated set of accounts from management, copy of which you have later on the agenda for today. We are still just working through those changes to make sure they align with what we were expecting, given the volume of them and kind of the amount of places in the accounts they hit. But from what we've done so far around the main statements, we're not finding any significant issues on that. And then obviously we need to complete our close down procedures, our internal review, to ensure the quality of our work and getting representations from yourselves through our letter of rep and the confirmation on the day that we sign that you would still sign the accounts, which we call the subsequent events procedures. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that. Can I open it up first to the committee? Any questions?
Ian, yeah. Hi.
Yes, Brian, yes.
Yeah, just come back to Janet. Janet, you briefly said at the end of your little summary that you're issuing an adverse report. Can you just clarify, adverse report on what? Which year? What are you doing?
So we have two responsibilities. One, to provide an opinion on the financial statements and whether or not they present a true and fair position for the organisation in the financial year 2018-19. That will be a clean opinion. It'll be unqualified. The adverse conclusion that we're providing is on the arrangements in place within the authority up to the point of 31st March 2019 on the arrangements to achieve value for money. And we're particularly concerned about the progress that had been made in terms of the improvements identified as required across the governance arrangements within the organisation. So if you remember, there was a governance action plan in place in 2016, 2017 and into 2018, and some progress was made on some of those actions. However, throughout 2018-19, not all of those actions and improvements had been put in place, and we felt that those were sufficiently pervasive across the organisation that would lead to an adverse conclusion.
Janet, sorry, are you okay with that, Brian?
No, but I understand what she's saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just come in on that same point, Janet? Because I suppose there's an element of judgment call in terms of that, which is understandable. But I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about the if you like, the deficits in inverted commas that the council had got that put you into the line of us being inadequate, as it were.
Yes, I could. So I think if I take you to page 80 in our report, which sets out what we'd originally identified as the key risk, which is around the governance action plan that had been established in 2016, and that whilst progress was being made, not all of that had been implemented. Now, we were concerned that we needed to follow up on what actions were being taken, whether the key areas that hadn't yet been put into place were actioned within 2018-19. And you'll see that we set out the areas that weren't fully implemented at the start of the year were around a due diligence manual about how major transactions, major decisions were entered into by the council. And also there was an element around the training that was required across the council for officers to be able to undertake decisions that would have significance to the organisation. There were some other areas around monitoring of cabinet decisions, and there was a view around production of the annual governance statement. Now, we've talked at length with officers, and we understand that some work was done on those areas in the year of 2018-19, but that partway through the year, actually, the focus was changed, and that's all credit to the incoming senior management at that time who felt that a different approach was required to move the governance arrangements on at a different pace and with a different focus. However, our issue is that those were important controls, governance arrangements and controls across key decision making, involvement of the right people to ensure the safety of those decisions. And those were not yet, those arrangements, whilst informal, were not fully embedded, fully in place and formalised by the organisation, which leaves a risk for the organisation in terms of how decisions were being made in that year. And that's what we felt was sufficiently significant to lead to an adverse conclusion.
Thanks for that explanation. Thank you. That was helpful. Any other comments on item 9 from anyone? So I think all we're asked to do as a is to note and consider the audit results report and recommendations. So thank you for that, Janet. And if we can now move on to item 10, which is the accounts themselves, which I guess Stuart, ably supported by Debbie and Jean, will present this. Is that right?
I am more than supported. They are in control in the lead, Chair.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bring Jean in just a moment to talk members through the body of the report and the changes that have been adjusted for, as our EY colleagues have referenced.
Can I just interrupt you just 1 second, Debbie, on that? Because I think one of the things I should have said at the start is just to remind members that these accounts we have seen previously. So I think I'm right in saying, Debbie, that what we're looking at are changes to that previous set of accounts. So just to make that clear. Sorry, Debbie, if you want to continue.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Chair. I was going to probably start with that point, that members have considered the draft statement of accounts at previous meetings, and over the last 12 months, we've been working hard with our colleagues in EY to respond to the external audit, which has been quite lengthy and dealing with, as we've talked about, some significant adjustments. I just draw members' attention to the recommendations in section 2 in terms of what members are actually being asked to consider this evening. And given the demise of the authority on the 31st of March, we have provided 3 scenarios that could have been applicable this evening. I just want to confirm that we are in a position that, as EY have just described, we're not in a position at this point to sign off the statement of accounts or the letter of representation, which need to be done together. And that can only really be done once EY have concluded the list of outstanding actions that Mark's just taken you through. So when we get to the recommendations, what we're looking at this evening is 2.1.3, which is asking the Audit Committee to approve the final statement of accounts once Jean's taken us through what those audit adjustments are. And the accounts will be signed by yourself, Chair, and by Stuart. And also to approve the letter of representation, which is in Appendix C, which does include a schedule of those unadjusted misstatements. There is a provision at 2.1.4, should there be some unforeseen circumstance which we're not aware of at the moment, that the Audit Committee is also asked to agree that in the event that all of those outstanding issues cannot be resolved prior to the end of business on the 31st of March, the delegations to both yourself as Chair and to Stuart will expire with the demise of the authority, and therefore there would need to be a referral over to the Audit Committee and the Section 151 officer in the West to consider any outstanding issues. Now, where we are at the moment, we're not expecting to be in that place. We're expecting that by the end of business on 31st of March, that Stuart and yourself will be in a position to sign, and our colleagues in EY will then, within a few days of that, conclude their work. But I just thought it was important just to give you that outline of what members have been asked to do as Jean talks you then through what the amendments to this financial statement itself have comprised.
Okay, thank you. I'm just looking at what I was going to say and thinking some of it's already been covered now, but the accounts presented to the committee tonight are still subject to final agreement with the external auditors, as Mark has explained. The changes that are still being agreed are relatively minor at the moment, improving wording, dealing with rounding within tables and very small queries. One area we think where there might be a slightly larger change is to the expenditure and funding analysis, which is note 1C on page 168 of your packs. The housing revenue account figures were inadvertently removed from this disclosure and need to be added back. But that's and it's a fairly key disclosure note, and I thought I should just draw that to your attention. But it doesn't impact on the core statements, and the figures are elsewhere in the accounts. They just need to be put in there. We've already covered, but you've already had a detailed explanation of the accounts when the 18-19 statements were originally presented to the meeting in September 2019. Therefore, I'm just going to cover the key changes that have been made to the accounts following the audit. Table 1 in the report on page 114 details the impact of the audit amendments on the council's usable reserves. There's 42,000 increase in the general fund balance, which was to do with a small change on interest, and a reduction of 4,625,000 in earmarked reserves, which is a transfer to unusable reserves to provide for the financing costs, part of the financing cost linked to the football club loan, which was treated as capital expenditure and now needs to be financed in the same way as any other capital expenditure. We're making that move now in 1819 because, as EY have very firmly pointed out to us, the principal on a number of the original loan tranches was due to be repaid in 1819. When that money would have come in, it would have been applied to unusable reserves to pay those financing costs. So we're now moving money from usable earmarked reserves to the capital adjustment account the unusable reserve for those financing costs. That means that when money comes in, you don't, for those initial tranches of loan, they would now be available capital receipts because it would be a capital receipt on coming in. Table 2 in the report, also on page 114, details the movements in the council's net worth as a result of the audit amendments. That includes one large movement in connection with assets under construction, where it's been agreed with the auditor to impair the value of the assets, which currently just consists of site clearance costs, as the redevelopment project has not yet progressed. There are also got a number of other property valuation changes which resulted in a small net increase in property value. So we've got a net overall decrease in property value. And it's the combination of those different types of adjustments. Appendix A to the report details all the changes to the balance sheet from the initial published accounts, shows some large correction movements between classes of assets and liabilities, which don't impact on the net worth or unusable reserves. It's just effectively remapping balances to the correct lines within the balance sheet. It also confirms the reduction in net worth and shows the impact on individual reserves of the audit amendments. The appendix also shows, in summary, the impact on the comprehensive income and expenditure account of those changes. Appendix B in your packs then is the revised accounts presented for approval, but are still subject to final agreement, as we've explained. And Appendix C is the management letter of representation, which needs to be approved by members now and will be sent to the auditors with the accounts at the point of signing. I'm happy to take any queries on the accounts and answer them to the best of my ability, or look to colleagues to help me explain. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Jean. And just to say, before I put it open for questions, you can see just from the weight of the accounts and also the descriptions that have been given by Debbie and Jean that they've worked incredibly hard to get us to this position. So many, many thanks for that, and any of the staff who are working with you as well, if you can pass my thanks on. That being said, I'll open it for questions from the committee in terms of the presentations you've just heard. Any questions? I'm not hearing any. So Debbie.
No, Chair, I'm just really pleased we're at this point. It's taken a long time, hasn't it? And I'm really pleased we're here. Thank you.
Yes, I would echo that point as well. This is becoming habitual, isn't it, really? You're stealing my thunder. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It feels, at one level, it feels as though we should be further on, but at another level, we know the bumps in the road. So it is very good in that sense. And I think the report explains well the sort of changes that we've seen. So if I'm not hearing any other comments, then I think the only thing that's left for me to say on the report is clearly there's still a few bits still to be covered, and we're hoping to get to the position that Debbie outlined earlier in the recommendations, 2.1.3, that Stuart as Director of Finance and me as the Chair can hopefully get to a position where we can sign them off while they've still got, they're still in the period of Northampton Borough Council. It'd be nice to do that rather than it go across the line. So hopefully we'll get to that point in the recommendation. Let's move on. I think we're on.
Chair, could I just intervene?
Yeah,
most of the reports are for information and noting, which is fine. But for as the auditors are in the room, for good governance, could I ask that you actually do invite the committee to accept the recommendations?
Yes.
Because if we do exercise our delegations, I would hate for the auditor to say you didn't get permission.
Yeah.
Sorry, Janet, I am checking on your body language there.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the caution, Stuart. Yes, we. I can't remember exactly what you were saying there. Yes, I'm asking the committee to support the recommendation 2.1.3 with a backup of 2.1.4 if needs be. So I don't know if someone can wave to say they approve that. I can see one hand. That's probably all I need. So thank you for that. Good. Let me move on to item 11, if I may then. Governance report update. And I suspect this is Joe who's been waiting patiently. So Joe, could you do the necessary on this one, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is not the normal governance report that I normally present at the quarterly meeting. This is basically a handover to give Audit Committee assurance that aspects of the governance work that was previously done by the NBC governance team, everything is being handed over in a structured manner to the new authorities. So I'll go through the report. There is an Appendix 1 that I've attached to this, and hopefully you've had time to go through it. Appendix 1 has a slightly little more detail in there, and there's some stats in there for the health and safety accidents and for the data breaches. But for the purpose of this, I'll keep it brief and I'll go through the actual audit report for it. So the risk registers that we normally do as a governance team, they've been handed over to West Northamptonshire Council. And as I understand it, from day one, there will be one in place as a corporate risk register. Going forward, again, an assumption that the audit and risk function will maintain and manage that function going forward, and it will at the moment sit under the finance director. Emergency planning, that will obviously stay in force. Emergency planning will be hosted in the north for the east and the west. The last I heard, there was going to be kind of separate teams, one for COVID and one for the normal emergency planning response, which is a better way to do it going forward, given that hopefully, we might be coming out of lockdown anytime soon. Health and safety, any outstanding audit recommendations will be going over with the health and safety team into the West Northants health and safety team. So we should have an easy transition with that. GDPR, information governance and data protection. Bell Cotton, who is the NBC DPO, was seconded to the West Northamptonshire Council on the 1st of February. So from my point of view, we have continuity going over there and the staff as well. So they'll maintain FOIs, ombudsman, everything that needs to be dealt with there will be hopefully, again, a smooth transition. Audit, internal control and risk, we've touched on before. Excuse me, with Duncan Wilkinson. At the moment, the plan is for LGSS or ex-LGSS, apologies, to take over the audit and risk function, and it'll be maintained and managed through there. That will sit under the finance director, so they will control it. But as Duncan said, there will be kind of servicing north and west. So how that will look will pan out over the next few weeks. Learning and development is hosted in the north, which will service the west as well. And HR and payroll will transfer over to the corporate services directorate, which basically covers all the things that were sitting under the governance team, from what I can remember, unless Stuart thinks I've missed something. So really, if anybody's got any questions on the Appendix 1, it's to give that assurance that things are in hand, and we will make sure that we have a handover.
Okay, thanks for that, Joe. Any questions from the committee? No, I'm not hearing. Oh, I have Councillor Stowe.
Could I just ask how long these lead authority arrangements are designed to last? Because I have to say, I'm very nervous about them. I think the whole point of creating two authorities was so that they would be unitary and self-governing and have a bigger grip,
I can't answer that, I'm afraid, Councillor Stowe. I don't know if George, you can answer.
Sorry, Councillor Stone, can you just repeat the question again? I beg your pardon.
It was around the life of these, the strategy around these lead authority arrangements. Is it a transitional arrangement, or is it, you know, that is it, that is going to be it then?
No, a number are for 12 months. Most are for 12 months, Councillor Stone. Some do go slightly beyond that, but the difference is where it's hosted. Obviously, that is. Sorry, I think lead authority hosted is usually for 12 months. Lead authority, they take the lead for that for a set period of time. So that will clearly need to be reviewed in the coming months by both authorities.
Okay, thanks, George.
Can I come in, Chair?
Yeah, of course.
Tonight, but I'm just really interested because obviously you've got the accident incident statistics down here. I just wondered who actually oversees that, because obviously accidents and incidents, there's obviously a cost to the authority, and I just wondered if these stats are actually sort of what you'd expect for an authority of Northampton size, and I just wondered what deep dive goes on that to actually prevent them happening in the future, really.
Okay, thanks. Joe, are you able to help on that?
So we have a health and safety committee, which is a legal statutory thing. So we work very closely with our two sort of trade unions, GMB and Unison. As a management board, I report up to George and we report it to CMB. We take a very keen interest. And I have to say we've worked very closely this past year, and the trade union side is as comfortable as a trade union side can be with the progress that we've made. Obviously, COVID has introduced some new risks, and we've worked very closely with them and our own health and safety teams and external advisors to minimise and mitigate that. But yeah, we take the health and safety side of stuff very, very seriously, and certainly the trade union side make sure we do.
Thanks.
And going forward, that will be under the AD human resources. So the AD human resources will be HR plus health and safety.
Okay, but obviously you've got stats here. Where does it appear that, have we got any figures at all for the cost of the authority of that? Like in particularly when people have to take time off work. Is there anything, or do you just look at the stats and talk to the unions about the stats and try to prevent them in future? Because there is a cost, isn't there, to these things? I just wondered where that crops up as well.
The actual statistics themselves. So you're making an assumption that some of those are more serious than they actually
No, I'm not making any assumptions at all, because you're looking at number of accidents there, so there's a cost to that, and I just wondered, are they all minor accidents, or are there some serious ones, or I just need to understand, is there a cost to the authority and how much it is?
There's no material cost. They are. So we particularly had an increase in near misses, which come through the stats, which again is something we've been really pushing hard with the trade union side, because that is the prevention. So although some of the stats went up in terms of overall numbers, the near miss means we didn't suffer. And in many of the sorry, the chair muted me. So can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah. Yes.
So we do look at the individual cases through our HR and the trade union side. If there was a material cost, we would be flagging it. But we are, fortunately they are incidents, but they haven't created anything that's a material cost to the council. Otherwise, we would report it as such.
Okay, Councillor Marriott. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Right, okay. In terms of agenda item 11, then the recommendation is that we note the contents of the report. If we can move on to number 12, which is the public interest report, which I think, as far as our committee is concerned, it's really just effectively for noting. I'm aware that the public interest report, as members will be here, went straight into council, and I think there was a report that went to cabinet this week highlighting the action plan that's going to be taken forward by the new authority. But if I could perhaps just stop there, and I'm not sure is it George or Stuart that just wants to say a few words on this one, perhaps?
So from my perspective, I'll let George do the words, but from the CFO perspective, the reason we have to bring it here because the process and governance requires us to bring it to Audit Committee. Obviously, if we were an ongoing authority, we would be definitely taking forward the action plan, we'd be progressing it and everything else. However, the action plan is now agreed with WNC. The other key element from my perspective to share with you through this report is that through issuing the PIR, and as council has received it and cabinet has done the update on the action plan, KPMG have now released our audit certificates for the years 15, 16, 16, 17 and 17, 18, i.e. they have now considered their actions closed in terms of the original objection. And so therefore, although they'd signed off the accounts, given us the true and fair view, we now actually have in the past week received the audit certificates. And that's quite important for us to report to Audit Committee. And again, I'm watching EY. It's quite important for them to have seen them as well, which we've shared.
Thank you, Stuart. George, did you want to come in?
Yeah, well, to be fair to yourself, Chair, and members, Stuart's eloquently described where we're at. Obviously, the public interest report came in at the end of January. We, under Schedule 7 of the Act and the wider Act, had to ensure that we published that as soon as possible on our website, which we did. And we then subsequently took it to our next available full council meeting, which was on the 22nd of February. We then, under that schedule, because we are transitioning in through local government reorganisation, formally had to consult with West Northamptonshire Shadow Authority, which we did, and they received their and signed off their response to that consultation at the Shadow Executive, West Northampton Shadow Executive, on Tuesday evening. We subsequently received that action plan in our own cabinet paper yesterday evening, Wednesday evening, where we agreed to that consultation and the updated action plan. And so for completeness, I will now be formally writing to the Chief Exec at West Northamptonshire Council to pass on the action plan to ensure that that is delivered against. What I've also been doing, Chair, is keeping the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government informed, and also the Local Government Association, and also, out of courtesy, KPMG, the original authors, and also EY, our current auditors of progress.
Okay. Thank you, George. That's helpful. Any comments, questions on this one? I don't hear anything, so thank you for that. The reports, it does have 3 recommendations that I think George and Stuart have gone over that ground anyway. So I'm assuming that the committee have got no problem in terms of adopting those recommendations. I think now we're on to the final report of tonight, which is Stuart's usual Chief Financial Officer report. Stuart, can I ask you to speak to this one, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. Ordinarily, this report rounds up all of the other bits and pieces that we sometimes see on Audit Committee, but not always. This has been a very busy agenda, so in the main, many of the items I would cover have actually been done in depth. The key items for me, just to bring your attention, is ordinarily I report that we have no changes to our accounting policy. However, on this occasion, I have to report that we have 2 changes as requested by EY. and they have been covered off in the actual statement of accounts proper. But broadly, it's about how we treat third-party loans, and the charges basically relate around to what we should or shouldn't have done, or could done differently in terms of recognising the minimum revenue position in relation to those football club loans. And the second one then is the committee's well aware of our investment in CCLA as a Treasury property investment. We were recognising it in a particular way, which we thought was correct. EY have a national view where they would prefer we did it in a different way. But the short version is it doesn't impact on our revenue. It's an accounting adjustment, for want of a better phrase, in terms of how we recognise on the balance sheet. If you wish to have any detailed discussions on that, Jean will answer some, or Janet. But that's the short version from me. In terms of treasury management, we've got no specific handover issues. Our treasury manager is actually going to the West because they also support NCC, and for assurance they work for Debbie. And Debbie and Jean are also part of the handover to West for a bit of consistency. So we're hoping EY will, I believe Janet is going to see us through to the end now, my understanding is. So we stand the chance of having 3 years consistency, which has been part of our problem on both auditors and staffing. So Jean, Debbie and a crew, we hope will service not only the accounts we hope to sign next week, but the next two, a bit like a bus route, we're hoping. And Janet has very kindly given us assurance that from an EY perspective, she will oversee those accounts to the end as well, because we're on a similar sort of trajectory to NCC in that respect. Hence the completing 2019-20, you've seen the draft of those accounts, but again, whatever adjustments we make in the current version of 18-19 will have an impact on the opening balances of 19-20, so those adjustments will need to be fed through. But that is now going to be carried forward through the West, but again, with the assurance that it's the same teams. In terms of internal audit, we've had that on the agenda, but I would like to thank BDO. They've certainly tested us, and in particular, we're very grateful for the fact, and just giving a bit of assurance to EY, we've dished out about 51 million at this point in time, and I'm hoping to get the last million in before I finish on the 31st of March. But we will have basically pushed 52 million pounds of BASE grants out. And when we first started, there was a lot of emotive pressure to get them out the door, and government were very pushy about that, and ministers were motivating us. However, because of some of our history, with support from George, particularly Joe and particularly BDO, we took a very prudent approach where we wished to check who was receiving our money, and do some checks and controls. So it did feel like a slow process, but BDO manually checked every single transaction we did. And although that may have caused some frustration, each one of those grants was £10,000 or £25,000. That's a lot of council taxes if we got it wrong. And from our reconciliation, we only have one error, which BASE have picked up on, and that's a £10,000 grant, and that's because it left our bank about 6 hours too late from their perspective. So it was a valid grant, paid to a good business, but it just went out the door hours after their guillotine. So, but BDO mobilised, their staff worked very much aligned to ours. And so for the first 8 to 12 weeks of COVID, we literally had staff working through the night, for want of a better phrase, and weekends, and bank holidays didn't exist. And BDO kindly did match us for that. And that gave us a lot more assurance and we basically delivered 36 million in that first lockdown. And if you consider we collect about 15 million in our share of council tax, and our budget is 30 million. So an ad hoc process, an assumption from government that we could just push the money out when business ratepayers don't actually all pay business rates. So we did do a scheme. We're pretty sure it's robust, subject to EY checking it one day. But I particularly do want to thank the BDO crew that came to the front for that. So not only have they been auditing us, but they've really helped us meet our COVID needs this year. And that includes testing some of the track and trace payments and the subsequent business grant processes as well, which is very key for me, that we are giving that assurance that we have administered over 50 odd million pounds of wider taxpayer money in the best way we can. And then really, I'd just like to say, if I may, I'm going to be a bit naughty. I'd like to thank the chair, who is the independent chair of Audit Committee. This is his last committee and last act for us. Also the deputy chair, because this is also his last committee and I believe will not be transitioning to the West. Councillor Stone, I'd like to thank Sally Beardsley as well, and Jonathan, for all the support. I came here for a short period and stayed a bit longer, thanks to George. But notwithstanding the reports, we have improved the governance. And I'm sure I'll have a discussion with EY over, is another book that looks the same as the Constitution, with a set of rules, regulations and delegations in it really value for money? We can discuss that one later. And I think from the Saints loan, no, we didn't finish the checklist, but we didn't finish the loan. So I, for councillors' benefit, I treat that as buying a house. You get your mortgage in principle, but you don't carry on paying for the survey and all the legal fees if you don't progress it to the end. So as an accountant, I would say value for money is about not spending money we don't have to. But as a senior councillor who is in the room at the moment said yesterday, good governance is actually about the people, not whether you've got a book, because people ignore that. So I would just like to part with that thought and thank all of the councillors for their support and all the teams, particularly Joe Bonham, who keeps a very good eye on me. George is my boss, but Joe is actually managing me most of the time. But thank you all for your input. I think we've made big inroads, and I just want to thank you all.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, I'll start by saying I'm pleased we've got Joe, if that's the case. But if I can just move on from that and take us back to the paper. Anything on the paper from committee members that they've heard from Stuart? No. Well, thanks for that, Stuart. It's a helpful paper. Can I just check in terms of the handover to West Northants? This is sort of part of your pack, as it were, that you've been talking to West Northants about. Yeah.
So I can assure you that the chief exec can nod in a minute, that I have done all my handovers to all of the ADs. I've been in constant touch with WNC's 151 for probably about 6 months now. And George has received a confirmation from him that I have handed over everything lock, stock and barrel, apart from Joe. Joe will be the last part of the handover, and she will take all our good governance with us.
Okay. Yes, thanks, Stuart. And as I said at the outset, and then Stuart's just said, it is the final committee. And to really echo, I suppose, what Stuart's been saying during my time here, we've obviously had difficulties with the accounts, but we've got to a better position now, and hopefully the 18-19 can get over the line, and I would hope that the 19-20s can be, not too far behind. Really, we've got a bit of a platform there, and I would echo Stuart's points about the governance. We've made improvements. It's not perfect. We know it's not perfect from some of the stuff that we've heard tonight, but there is, there is some clear evidence of where we've moved on in terms of that. So I think, there are certain things that West Northants are in a good position to take forward. So on that point, really, what I would like to do is is thank the council staff in particular that have been involved in all this. Some of them I know I won't be cited on, so I'm very conscious of the fact that there'll be teams of people that get nowhere near an audit committee, but play a key part. But it would be remiss of me not to thank Stuart and Joe in particular. Particularly now I know that Stuart's acknowledged that Joe manages him. I've worked under this illusion that it's the other way around, but Joe was always the director. I didn't realise that. But thank you both for that. And then finally from me, I'd just like to thank members of the Audit Committee, both past and present, because I'm acutely aware of the fact that if you like, your average member, if such a person does exist, doesn't come into local government to sit on an audit committee. But I have to say that everyone that's been involved in my experience at Northampton has made a contribution. Some more than others, and some were echoing my thoughts tonight, which is getting a bit worrying. So it's perhaps a good time to be cutting off. And finally, just to say a big thank you to Brian in his role as deputy. It's always a thankless task being a deputy to me, but Brian has been really helpful. Anytime I've asked for any support in terms of standing in and all the rest of it, he's been absolutely the front of the queue. So many thanks for that. Hopefully you've like me seen this tonight as being on the whole positive, although there's obviously some challenges. And I wish you all well for the future, whether you're moving into another authority or deciding to go into a completely a different field. But many thanks for your time, and I hope things go well in future for you all. Thank you.